Hello, I'm Jeff Hajic, the owner and founder of Valaction. Welcome to this presentation on Phase 2 of my continuous improvement development system. If you are watching this video, I'm assuming that you have already decided that creating a structure to support your continuous improvement efforts is important, and you want to take a crack at creating a business management system that drives a continuous improvement culture. If you recall, in previous videos, I talked a lot about the failure rate of lean initiatives. A lot of failure comes from dabbling in continuous improvement. Perhaps the company only tries a handful of tools rather than focusing on principles. Maybe only a few leaders in the company really get behind it, and the rest are just biding time until the effort passes. Phase 2 is intended to help you sidestep these problems. This is the committing phase. The purpose of Phase 2. To be quite candid, this phase is intended, in large part, to weed out the leadership teams that are unlikely to be successful down the road. I intentionally put some of the more challenging leadership activities early on in Phases 2 and 3. There's no point in investing a lot of time and resources if the leaders are counting on the frontline teams to do all the heavy lifting. One of the ways I encourage this self-selection is to require a few things upfront from leaders. In each phase, from 2 on out, the first checklist item is to create an action plan for the phase. In Phase 2, I also require a general roadmap to go through all 6 phases. This helps leaders go into their transformation with their eyes open. They'll see all they have to do, and they see how long it is going to take. This is one reason that lean transformations can fall flat. Leaders are looking for a quick fix, and lean is a long-term effort. We are talking years. It might take 3 or 4 or even 5 years or longer to really become a lean company. There will, of course, be improvement along the way, but to get to the point where others see you as a bastion of lean, well, that's a long haul. The short of it is that if the leadership team can navigate through the tasks of this phase and are not deterred, the chance of them sticking with their transformation later is much higher. What if you already started lean? I'm going to take a step back here and address a common situation. Many of the people using my system have already started a lean journey on their own. For them, I suspect progress through the phases will be quicker because they will already have many of the tools in place. I do recommend going through each phase anyway, though. It will do 2 things for you. The first is that it will confirm that you are not skipping anything important. The second is that you will get a chance to incorporate my ideas into things you are already doing. It would be pretty arrogant for me to just assume you are doing things wrong and my way is better, but it is worth taking a look at what I suggest and seeing if you can incorporate that into what you do. Perhaps I have something in a form that you might want to add to yours, or I might even have some materials that can augment a tool you are already using. Or I might have a different spin on a tool that you might like. It won't take much time to review what you are already doing, and there's a lot of upside. I just suggest skipping steps that don't make a lot of sense to you. Announcing your commitment to lean if you've already been on a path for a few years, for example, is probably not a priority. How long will Phase 2 take? So how long will this phase take? That's a tricky question. Phase 1 is rather random in length. For some, they are convinced rather quickly. Some accumulate information sporadically over years. Others just give up. But when they decide to move forward, it is often like a switch is flipped. It can be pretty hard to predict when that will happen, though. You may not know if a person is days away, years away, or will never be convinced. Phase 2 is a bit different. Like Phase 1, the timeline can vary widely. The big difference is that there is no switch that gets flipped. There is just a progression of activities that show increasing commitment until it is time to get to work, or until progress peters out and lean is abandoned. The ultimate path and timeline depend upon how committed the leadership team is to completing the Phase 2 activities. Some will dive right in and start ticking off the items on the checklist. Others, though, take their time. Some just dilly-dally through indecision. Others intentionally slow things down. This situation is most common when lean is directed by a hands-off leader who doesn't check on his or her subordinates. While my official stance is that there is no time limit on this phase, in practice, it generally takes only a handful of months if a team really wants to move forward. If the team drags its feet approaching a year or so, it is probably an indication that inertia has won and it is time to table the continuous improvement initiative. A principle-based approach. Starting in phase 2, each of the phases centers on a set of guiding principles. To prevent confusion and make sure we are all using the same labels for things, I want to clarify what I see as the difference between values and principles. A value is a choice. It defines what the company sees as important, and thereby governs its behavior. A principle, on the other hand, is more like a law of nature. Admittedly, over long periods of time, business principles can change, and they may not be absolutely universal, so it is not a perfect analogy. But in the relatively short planning window of a half-decade or so, business principles are pretty stable, and they apply to the vast majority of companies. With that in mind, it can be treated like governing laws of business. They define the natural order of things. An example of this would be something like the relationship between an item's price and its unit sales. In nearly all circumstances, if you lower the price of an item, you will sell more of it. Of course, marketing experts could probably create a situation where this might not apply, but as a rule, if anybody watching this video lowered the price of an item in their catalog right now, sales would increase. If you want to read more about my thoughts on principles and values, here's a link to an article on my website. Also, keep in mind that principles are not limited to within the walls of your company the way values are. Principles apply to all companies, but just because a principle is universal doesn't mean it will have the same exact impact in all situations. Some affect big companies more than small ones. Some affect those with higher labor costs more than those with automated processes, highly automated processes. But similar companies are impacted by the same principles in a similar way. There is a difference, though, in how a company manages these principles. Companies have limited resources. While all the principles apply to every company, your leadership team will have to decide which ones are the most important to your situation. These are the ones you'll feed. Just know, though, that if you neglect a principle, you are not immune to the effects of that neglect. It is about making choices in how you apply resources to get the good from the principles while avoiding the bad. This continuous improvement development system tries to create behaviors that act in accordance with these principles. As I mentioned before, and will undoubtedly mention again, you are free to skip any steps or tools or activities that you don't think apply to you. Just do this with an eye towards the impact on these principles. I'd also like to point out that I've truncated many of the principles into more of a directive. The actual principle might be, strong relationships improve employee retention and customer loyalty. We say the principle is, build relationships. The brevity helps create focus. Okay, enough about principles in general. Let's dive into the phase 2 principles. Principle, build relationships. A successful business management system has many moving parts. Those parts, the different groups of people with their own needs and personal objectives, have to work together effectively or the system will fail. While the impact of these relationships is most profound in later phases, the groundwork for these relationships has to be laid early on. These relationships are numerous: boss to employee, employee to employee, company to customer, company to vendor. Actually, those last two are a bit general. It is really sales rep to buyer or materials manager to account representative. Relationships are personal. Companies don't have relationships. People do. Principle, develop trust. A large component of relationship building is trust. Trust goes far beyond just relationships, and it goes both ways. Leaders have to believe that their teams are competent to handle the challenges of a continuous improvement culture. And perhaps more importantly, teams have to believe in their leaders. They can't worry about whether the boss is looking out for them or just using them as tools to make a profit. Principle, develop leaders internally. Without strong leaders, there is little hope to building a successful business management system. Leaders have to be able to overcome resistance to change and get people operating outside of their comfort zone. They have to be willing to establish stretch goals that have a high risk of failure. They have to be able to stand up for what is right, even when it is not popular or not easy. One of the challenges is that this leadership is not generally readily available on the job market. The company has to cultivate it on its own. Fortunately, a strong business management system built upon a continuous improvement culture makes a fertile field. There are plenty of opportunities to mentor leaders in this environment. Principle: show respect for people. One of the reasons that lean has a bad reputation with many people is that this principle, that of respect for people, is frequently violated. In fact, this is one of the reasons that there is an ongoing battle between workers and businesses. When people are treated as commodities or as a means to an end, it is no surprise that they don't feel valued. The truth, though, is that there are two good reasons to show respect for people within your company. The first is that it is simply the right thing to do. Work, though valuable and often fulfilling, is a means to an end. Saying things like, "It's just business," is plain wrong. Business doesn't give you a justification for casting aside your morals. The second reason is that respecting people is profitable. Engaged, satisfied employees do better at their jobs and go above and beyond what is expected of them. That's good for business. One final thought: respect goes both ways. It is often looked at as managers respecting employees. When workers are disrespectful to their bosses, it is more than just insubordinate. Bosses are people too. Treating them poorly is just as morally bankrupt as when a manager disrespects his team. Principle: think long term. The modern stock market has helped businesses grow through the ready access to investors. Unfortunately, becoming a publicly traded company is something of a double-edged sword. Once a company shows up in the stock market, the pressure to provide ever-increasing quarterly returns is relentless. But becoming a strong, lean company takes time. This disconnect can make for hard choices by leaders. For example, there can be pressure to lay people off in slow periods, but those people, in a lean company, have had countless hours of management coaching invested in them. Leaders have to recognize that chasing short-term profits is exceptionally costly in the long run. Principle: embrace facts and data. In traditional organizations, decisions are frequently made by gut feel. Leaders rely on their experience to make educated guesses about what to do. Sometimes they get it right, but they also get it wrong at times. Focusing on facts and data reduces the frequency of the latter. It also helps leaders build consensus. It creates clarity and agreement about an issue, and then helps create alignment when a solution is selected. It is easier to get buy-in when there is supporting numerical information to back up a decision. It is easier to communicate how and why a decision was reached when there is data that supports it. Facts and data also changes the culture of a company. This sort of information forces rigor into one's problem solving. That focus on using a process to get to the root cause and then to a solution conserves an organization's resources and speeds its improvement. Phase 2 risk. It is extremely easy to get derailed during the committing process. For the most part, during this phase, executives have little invested in creating a business management system. There is little emotional attachment to the program. That means if they change their mind or fail to commit, there is very little cost to write off. The decision makers may also be deterred by the knowledge that they gain. As they learn more about what will be expected of them and of their employees under a robust business management system, they may become discouraged. The truth is that this is somewhat by design. We want companies to have a full understanding of the degree of work that will be required to make this fundamental change in how they manage the company. We would much rather someone chooses not to even attempt this change than to begin it half-heartedly with an elevated chance of failure. Phase 2 activities. As I mentioned, in Phase 2, you'll need to do an action plan for the phase, complete with assignments and dates, and you'll need to do a long-term timeline of how you plan to move through Phase 6 of the development system. In addition, we want you to gather or create some high-level corporate documents. These include a mission statement, a list of the company's core values, and a strategy. Most companies have some version of these already. This is a good time to review them and make sure they make sense. The first two tend not to vary much in format. The strategy, however, can be a set of simple statements or it can be a thick planning document. The point, though, is to know where the company wants to go. You'll be using this as a basis for your policy deployment in Phase 3, but it is important to make sure that the company has a coherent strategy that is known by everyone in the organization as you start making changes. Getting help. Another important item in Phase 2 is to find someone who can help you along the way. This is a tricky item to talk about, as I do consulting work as well as development of these training materials. It can come across as self-serving to include this as a step in the committing phase. My concern with you going it alone is twofold. The first reason is about knowledge. There is so much information on continuous improvement available that it is tempting to try to implement a business management system on your own. You can succeed like this. The problem is that you will have more missteps on your own than with a guide. Guides help you avoid costly mistakes and can teach you tricks to make things go more smoothly. In short, a good guide will reduce rework and make you more efficient at moving through the phases. The second benefit of a consultant is motivation. When you are paying someone, you are more likely to get things done. Over the years, I have seen this time and time again. When a company was doing an internally led Kaizen event, there was little communication about what was going on and resources could be hard to find. When the company had consultants on site, the project got loads of resources. Leaders were magically less busy and could participate. The audience for daily leaders meetings and report outs was standing room only. I recommend you try bringing in a consultant a few times to see if they actually help you. If they do, it was money well spent. If not, the cost won't be astronomical and you'll still learn more about how to help your company navigate its journey. The leadership team. The senior leaders have some work to do early on. They need training on what Lean is and what it means to them and what they will need to do. We also like to see them sign a contract of change. It is mostly a psychological exercise, but it serves as a marker that things will be different. The real telling change, and the one that is probably most closely tied to the success of the company, is adding goals related to the business management system to the senior leaders' performance plans. Most leaders at this level get bonuses as part of their compensation. Their personal success should be tied to the company's Lean success. They need aggressive performance metrics to force them to adopt a new way of managing. These are the best goals. A second kind of CI goals relates to specific activities on the continuous improvement roadmap, the number of Kaizen events, the percentage of people trained, etc. A good combination of both sends a clear message. The second category should be phased out over time, though. Companies early in the Lean journey need to be prodded a bit, but the value of Lean is not in the activities it promotes, but in the results. As your performance metrics get more aggressive, the need for specific Lean-centric metrics diminishes. Allocating resources. You'll need a lot of resources to be successful at Lean. You'll need a financial commitment. Many of the actions you'll be taking from here on out require funding, and that means a line item on the budget. In addition, you'll need human resources. There's the program leader mentioned previously. Companies that are great at Lean also have dedicated improvement teams. Some use this group as a training program. Potential leaders cycle through the resource team where they do a lot of hands-on projects. Junior leaders and middle managers cycle through as a black belt, mentoring and training Kaizen teams. You'll need to invest in training materials. Sometimes this can be pricey depending upon the materials you use. You'll also need to create a place to do projects. Many companies stock this with raw materials for building fixtures and workstations. Finally, the support teams will need to be ready for an increased workload. Maintenance will be moving machines around. Tooling will have an uptick in manufacturing fixtures. IT will have loads of new software modifications and other requirements. The bottom line is that in Phase 2, your leadership team has to open up their wallets. If they don't, it is a bad sign for success. Creating processes. In Phase 2, much of the work is behind the scenes or fairly isolated to specific groups. As you wrap up Phase 2, you're going to have to be ready to start doing a lot more visible work. This means you'll need strong processes in place. The first big one is the process for documenting your business management system itself. You want something that is going to be consistently followed. That means you'll need a process on how to create and store documents to use for training. You should also include a system so everyone knows what everyone else is doing and how they are doing it, a sort of knowledge archive. This document, the business system documentation, defines how your company will operate. It is important. While I'm on the subject of documentation, define, in a process, how each support team will handle requests for continuous improvement support. Nothing derails a project team's motivation more quickly than being told to come up with new ideas and then having to wait weeks to get support, if they get it at all. Support teams need to budget for this added load, and they need to be responsive to the special, timely needs of a Kaizen team that is on a tight schedule. Moving to Phase 3. Motivated leadership teams make quick work of Phase 2. Those that are on the fence tend to drag things out. Regardless of which end of the spectrum you are on, when you move to Phase 3, expect a fast pace. There is lots of change, and tasks are dependent upon the successful completion of the earlier tasks. Be ready for a flurry of activity. Okay, that's about it for now. Hopefully, you are more clear about what is expected of you in Phase 2. If you need help, please let me know at info@valaction.com. You can also get Phase 2 training materials at www.valactionstore.com. As always, best wishes on your continuous improvement journey.